Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. Any questions before we share screen and jump back in? Nope. All right. So that's what I'm going to do then. Let's share that. So you guys should be looking at the offer now. And it's right about where we left off last week. So if we look here, last week we talked about the verification of the funds, right? Whether it's all cash, down payment, loan application, we talked about that. We talked about the seller agreeing to pay the obligation of the buyer compensation. So if you missed last week, go back. It's right towards the end of the video. You can watch that and get that information. So what we're going to look at right now is paragraph, starting with paragraph 3J, we're jumping into starting with our time periods, okay? So the next one is the final verification of condition. The default of that is 5 days prior to close of escrow. I don't see any reason that needs to change. 5 days prior to close of escrow, not a problem, okay? Next one is an assignment request. So what that means is the buyer has by default 17 days to assign the sale or to request the assignment. It's not a guaranteed, right? Just because I request an assignment of you does not mean that the seller has to approve that assignment. So if I write an offer and I said, well, thinking maybe I could assign this to somebody else during escrow. If you haven't already done it when you wrote the offer, and we can, scroll back real quick to page 1. If I didn't write here as, this is, I don't know why it only has my last name, but if it was this and or assignee when I write the offer, if that's what my offer looked like, then with it not receiving a counter from the buyer, they have already agreed, a counter from the seller, they've already agreed to allow me to assign. So the only thing that I have to worry about here is the amount of time I have to make that assignment. 17 days should be more than enough, okay? If I'm the listing agent, I know we're talking about writing, but if I'm the listing agent, I got to make sure that this assignment request, if I start changing these time periods and counters, that time period also gets countered, right? I can't just ignore it, okay? So assignment request, remember that when you're writing your offer. If you want to shorten it because you've shortened other time periods, go for it. If it's not really a concern because there's no intention of assigning it, I don't think you need to address it. Okay, but by default, 17 days. Next up, the loan contingency. Now we're into 3L with the contingencies. 3L1 is loan, 17 days by default. 17 days, that's it. Look, if I'm going to write an offer, I'm generally not going to write an offer that's less than a 30-day escrow. And to be honest with you, I'm probably going to do 45. Depending on the conversations I have with the seller, but the majority of the sales that we're doing are contingent anyway, right? The majority of the offers that we write on a listing is that seller is contingent on finding a replacement property. And if the case is that they're going to be contingent, I know that we can write 30-day escrow and escrows get extended and all that stuff. But we already know that it's not going to close in 30 days, especially if I've seen contingency periods where they're asking you for a seller's purchase replacement property of a 30-day contingency to find a replacement property. And I get that. I understand the difficulty of getting their offer accepted. So we know that we're not going to have short escrows. So I'm going to probably write 30 or 45 days. 17 days is perfect. But if I'm one of those that's writing an offer and I see them still, because the lenders will tell you, oh, we'll get that closed in 21 days. If I'm writing an offer at 21 days and I'm writing an offer at 21 days and leaving this at 17, I'm just asking myself for extra counters or for a listing agent to look at my offer and say, I'm going to let you have a 21-day escrow, so 4 days prior to close of escrow. Later than your final walkthrough, you still have a loan contingency. It doesn't make sense. Be sensible about it. A common sense thing. Look at the time periods, right? If this were a 30-day escrow, I'm 2 weeks prior to closing, right, that I have to remove all my contingencies. If I'm doing a 21-day escrow, I got to do at least 10 days prior. So if you're going to do a 10-day escrow or 21-day escrow, then you should be able to feel comfortable removing your loan contingency in 10 days, 12 days max. At least acknowledge it, right? Because at some point you guys are going to deal with I get it. There's a lot of listing agents out there that don't understand the contract, right? That maybe are not as savvy with it, and they don't pay attention. All they look is that first page. They look at the price, the escrow period, the down payment, what your loan looks like, and then they look at your credit and they look at the money that you have in your account. And they don't look at these times. And then they accept your offer. And then we get into a position later on where they're like, hey, you need to remove your loan contingency. You're like, hey, you left it at 17 days. I still have it, right? They don't pay attention. It's not good for us to take advantage of that situation either, just as it's not good for listing agents to take advantage by, severely cutting out contingencies, the amount of time we have, or taking them out altogether. Make it make sense. Your job, my job, listing agent, buyer's agent, is to get the deal closed, right? Like, first and foremost, my job is to protect my clients, find them a property, and get them into the home of their dreams as a buyer's agent. But then second, the biggest part of that is the relationship I have with the listing agent and my ability to give my buyers a chance. So think about that, right? If I'm doing a shorter escrow, shorten your time periods on your own. Don't wait for a counter to come in. I'm not saying you should shorten your contingency periods, your escrow periods, because I would still say that there's a majority of those deals that we believe are going to close in 21 days that still do not. There's always something that pushes it, usually closer to 30, and a lot of times past that time. So I think let's not get overeager. Let's be honest. Again, that's communication with the listing agent, right? Hey, listen, this is why we're going to put this escrow period. This is, it's conversations. Did somebody have a question? I thought I saw something flash over here on the chat or on the participants. No? Okay. All right. Next up, the appraisal contingency. Back to the loan. No loan contingency. Please do not check that unless your buyer is 100% all cash. Don't check off no loan contingency. Okay. Appraisal contingency. We're probably going to spend the most time with appraisal contingency today, just because I think that this becomes a little confusing for people. It's a conversation I have, if not weekly, multiple times a week. So the appraisal contingency by default, let's forget this checkbox and this or. Let's forget that for a second. Pretend that doesn't exist. The appraisal contingency itself. Appraisal contingency is based upon an appraised value at a minimum of purchase price. That's the default. That's the general. That's what it's been forever. It means that whatever I offer you, if you allow me to have an appraisal contingency, that appraisal contingency is contingent upon the property appraising at the amount we agreed on in the purchase agreement, right? That's it. That's what it means. The next section, this new section, where it says or a checkbox, that's if I'm trying to protect the position of a buyer and have a seller understand that we're willing to compensate the seller beyond the appraised value. So, example, we're going to do simple math. I have a property listed for $500,000. Getting multiple offers, right? And I have a buyer that says, look, I really want the place. I'm going to offer them $460,000 for the property. Okay? $460,000. But I am pretty certain, as buyer's agent and buyer, that it's not going to appraise for the 560. But you listed it at 500. Which means that you should feel confident that that property should, at a minimum, appraise for that 500. So what I'm going to do to show you that I'm intent on purchasing the property is I'm going to offer you the 560. And I have the money to make up the difference. I have the $60,000, the difference between your list price at 500 and my offer price at 560. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this box, and I'm going to write in here $500,000. And what that says is me to you, buyer to seller, is that I am all in. I will not use my appraisal contingency as long as the property appraises for the amount you listed it for. So if it appraises at 500, we're good to go. I have to pay you 560. That's what I'm stating. In paragraph 3L2, if I check the box, put a minimum of 500, and it appraises for 560, I have to come up with 560 out of my pocket because I cannot use my appraisal contingency to cancel. If it appraises at 520, I have to pay you the 20,000 at least. I have to at least pay the difference between. I am not protected. I will lose my deposit if I cancel because of the appraisal contingency, because my appraisal contingency was subject to an appraisal of 500,000. Now, if it appraises for $499,999, it's $1 less than that amount, then I can use my appraisal contingency because it didn't appraise for your list price. It doesn't mean I'm going to, it means I have the ability to invoke my appraisal contingency. So again, I always have these conversations with agents. We're like, well, we want to write an offer and say we can only afford to pay X amount difference, right? Like we're writing over, but we can only pay $10,000 over appraised value. Perfect. In this case, list price was 500. I'm paying 560, right? I am offering 560. I can only go $10,000 over appraised value. And so I know I want to ensure that at least that $10,000 mark is hit. I say it has to appraise for 550. As long as it appraises for 550, I'm committed. If it appraises for anything less than 550, then we can negotiate. Do you guys follow? Now, I can still add in additional terms as we get down here. I can still write in, where did my section go? Where I want to write additional finance terms. I could write in here, buyer agrees to pay $10,000 over appraised value. I could write that in. I could write it in down here. But this section alone, when I write my offer this way, is saying that if I'm offering you 560, I'm still going to pay you 560 as long as it appraises for 550 or more. So you could just do that math very simply. If it's $25,000, then what I'm going to do here is it's going to be 535 is what it has to appraise for. Okay? And as listing agents, we've got to start getting to the point where we understand that every deal we get that is financed is required to appraise. Like there needs to be an appraisal. In order for the lender to give you the money, the appraisal has to come in at some amount, right? That's how they're going to lend you. And if I'm going to be that listing agent that says, no, you're going to pay based on my list price, fine, I'm going to counter it, then I better have proof from that buyer that they have the ability to do that. If I get an offer from a buyer that says, hey, I'm going to pay you the difference between, your 500 and 560, that's great. But what do the proof of funds show? So if I'm doing that, what we talked about at the beginning, where it's like, hey, your offer price was 500, so that's what I'm writing is, it's contingent on it appraising for 500,000, but I'm offering you 560, then my proof of funds should back that up, right? I should have the down payment that I have here, the $160,000 that I'm putting down. I should have at least $220,000 in my bank account as my proof of funds, right? So I know what happens is, and I've talked to listing agents in person about this, is they get these offers like, well, yeah, but they're going to pay the difference. And I say, okay, let's look at their proof of funds that they submitted. And they barely have enough for the down payment and closing costs on the deal as it is, the way it was written. They don't have the additional funds. You can't just say, oh, well, they said. Yeah, they said. But if they don't have the ability to complete it, we're the ones with the egg on our face because we go to sell it to our seller as these buyers are going to pay the difference. And they don't have the ability to. So keep that in mind. If you as buyer's agent are committing to pay the difference between an appraised value and an offer price, make sure that your proof of funds shows your ability to do that. And highlight that to the agents, because not all the listing agents think that way. They just see it and say, yeah, great, they're going to pay the difference. Highlight it. Put a note on the proof of funds. By the way, down payment is, $150. Here's the $60,000 that we have extra to pay over appraised value, if that's the commitment that you guys are willing to make. If you're not willing to make that commitment, then you leave this alone, and you leave it as it has to appraise at the offer price. Because then if it doesn't appraise at offer price, there is no commitment of me to pay any difference. Does that make sense to everybody? There's got to be questions, so go for it. Whoever's first. Hands up, type it in the chat, unmute yourself if you can. Anybody? Go ahead, Jesus.
I hate to always look around for a different solution, but if we are presenting the buyer and right now the market is so tight, how can we utilize this for our convenience? Is there any way to go around, like to bluff it if we don't have the money?
You could always try, but if you don't have the money, and see, this is the problem though. You try to bluff, right? And you say, let's say you do, it's the list price is 500, you offer 560, you write in there, it has to appraise at 500, and it appraises at 501, right? Which means now you're $59,000 difference. And then the seller goes, great, perfect, we're continuing on at 560. And you say, oh, no, we want to reduce the price. Well, hold on a second. You said as long as it appraised for 500, and it did, which means now I can't use my appraisal contingency to cancel. Right. So if I want to make that bluff, or try to use that as a play, as a ploy to get my offer accepted, and I don't have a way to eject myself from the transaction, meaning the listing agent is right on it with timelines, we haven't gotten the appraisal back yet, but I have to remove my inspection contingency. Once that thing appraises, and it appraises for the amount that I wrote there, I don't have any more contingency. Like, I can't cancel for anything else if my investigations are gone, right? Because I can't use my loan contingency to cancel if the only reason I can't qualify is the appraisal. So yeah, I get where you're going for. You could use it as a tactic, but you got to have some, even if you're hoping that you don't have to pay a difference, you've got to have at least some of the ability to pay the difference.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, just be careful. That's a pretty high price bluff, right? If you're playing poker, $60,000 hand. Darwin was, I think, waving his hand in chat. Go ahead.
Boss, I had a question. Do you recommend it would be a good idea that even though you offer the asking price, to mark here, or just leave it alone when you offer just the asking price? Because let's say the property price for less, you don't.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it goes back to depending on the qualifications of your buyer. Like, if here's the thing, because I know that people are still writing over because there's still competition, right? There is still people list a property and they're writing offers over because they need to get something accepted. I get that. It's not as crazy as it was, but it still is happening. If I have the ability, if I have the money to pay the difference, then yeah, I want to show them some commitment. Right, I'll do that lower price appraisal where I'm committing to pay more. If I don't have the ability, if I don't have the extra money, if all my money is paying my closing costs, excuse me, if all of my money is paying my down payment and my closing costs, then I don't have that ability. So guess what? I have to make it the offer price is what my appraisal is based on. So it's going to be case by case. And I would say that you only want to do that lower appraised value if you do have the luxury with a buyer of a lot of extra cash. Because we do have, I mean, there are buyers out there that their qualifications, you know, for purchasing a house, the amount that they can qualify are not as high as they would want to, but the cash reserves that they have are higher. And so they might have the ability to do those kind of things to strengthen their offer. So keep that in mind, right? Because my offer does get stronger. If I reduce the amount the property has to appraise for, then then my offer gets stronger than somebody who says it has to appraise for the offer price, right? So if I have that strength of being able to do that, then please use it. If you don't, then don't use it, because then it becomes a tactic like Jesus asked, and you put yourself in a very uncomfortable position if you lose out on the ability to get them, extract them from the transaction, because you don't want to put their deposit in jeopardy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Any other questions about the appraisal contingency? So my thing is, you always are going to want to have an appraisal contingency when you write your offer. I know that there's going to be times where listing agents are going to counter you and take it out, and I get that. That becomes a case-by-case thing. That becomes a conversation with your buyer on how you guys are going to proceed in the transaction without that appraisal contingency and what their options are and all those things. That becomes a conversation. I don't think, if I'm writing an offer and I'm advising you guys how to write offers and write them well, I would not voluntarily do that as a tactic in my offer writing and presenting. Okay. So that wouldn't be my choice. I wouldn't say to my buyer, hey, listen, what we're going to do to make our offer stronger is remove this appraisal altogether. I wouldn't. What I would do is say maybe shorten the amount of time we have, right? So if I didn't have the cash to lower this appraised value mark, then maybe what I would do is on my own, I would say, okay, well, 12 days or 10 days appraisal contingency. That would be based on conversations that I would have with my lender to say how fast, once we get an acceptance, how fast can we get an appraiser out there? And as long as I can get the appraisal done in that time period, then shortening the appraisal period, if I can't do the other things, is the farthest I'll go. I will not remove it. I will not in an offer. Based on a counter and a conversation and things like that, yes, but not in an offer. So remember, as you're writing it, you're always going to leave it in. Your first choice is that your buyers have the ability to make up differences as an appraisal gaps. So you address that with the amount of the appraisal. The next thing that you could do for your strength is the amount of time for the appraisal. Now, if you could do both, lower the appraised value threshold and pay an appraisal gap and show proof of that and shorten the time periods, even better. We're talking about strengthening your offer even more. Okay. And so again, I know this is about writing the offer, but listing agents, start getting in your head that you've got to leave this appraisal contingency in and address it in the same ways as I would as a buyer, right? Shortening time periods, changing the amount of the appraised value. Okay. Now, here's the box for no appraisal contingency. We already said I would advise you never do that unless for some reason. I mean, I've had, we've had deals in the past where the people have such a large down payment, the neighborhood they're moving to, they do these, desk review appraisals where they don't actually send out a full appraiser. They just need to look at comps, or they're already, it happens. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens. So maybe you already know ahead of time, it doesn't require the appraisal just based on the amount of money that they're putting down, whatever the terms are. But one of the things that you guys have to understand is that if I don't have an appraisal contingency, or if I've changed this price here to something other than the offer price, and I think we wrote 800,000 for this property. I think, I can't remember, 750,000, let's say, right? If I'm a VA buyer, the FVAC is going to be an FHA or a VA buyer. The FVAC is going to be included, and what that form does for a buyer is it says, per FHA guidelines, whatever amount is written on the FVAC, if the property doesn't appraise for that amount, they can't lose their deposit whether they have an appraisal contingency or not. Okay, that's for FHA deals only. So when I write my offer, if I write my offer like this, where it's not the offer price, it's a lower price, I've got to do the same thing on the FVAC, or else I'm playing with smoke and mirrors with the listing agent, and they're going to notice it. If I'm a listing agent, I got to pay attention to that FVAC that comes in and make sure it's correct. And if I'm going to be the one as a listing agent that's going to counter it, I've got to also address the FVAC. Okay, so just keep in mind that when it's an FHA or a VA deal, even if they have checked the box that says no appraisal contingency and they're doing FHA, this FVAC acts as a secondary appraisal contingency. Okay, so you got to keep that in mind, but we're not going to check that off. Okay, all right, last chance for appraisal questions. Okay. All right. Investigation of property. Default 17 days. Again, address these days based on your escrow period. If you're leaving at 30, 45, 17 shouldn't be a problem. If you're going to lower it, if you're going to lower down your escrow period to 21 days or anything else, then you've got to address it here, right? 10 days, 7 days, whatever it is you feel comfortable with. Informational access to property should match all of these things, because I have to make sure that at least the appraiser has access and at least I have access. Because what this informational access to property is saying is that even if I had no contingencies, for the amount of days written in here, I still have access to the property to be able to go. I can still do reports. I can still look at it doesn't create cancellation rights. It doesn't give me the opportunity to request repairs, but I have access to the property for things that I still need to do even without contingencies. So let's make sure that this always matches these, right? So if my appraisal's 10, if my investigation's 10, then my informational access is also going to be 10, not 17, right? And I want to do that so that it makes sense, right? It makes sense to the seller that my timeline's like, what do I still need access after I've already done my investigations and my appraisal? Why do I need access? I don't. Okay, so keep in mind that that's what that's for. The review of seller's documents. Again, if my investigation time is 10 days, then that should be also. But I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and we're going to look at, just real quick so we can do the math here, the seller's delivery is 7 days. So if I'm going to review the documents in 10 days, that only gives me 3 days to do that review. Right? So I would address this, maybe cut it down to 5, buy me a couple extra days to be able to review it. At least make it make sense as far as time periods go, with paragraph 14. We'll talk about it a little bit. We're talking about writing an offer, so we're not going to dig into like the paragraphs that are explanation paragraphs, just enough so that you know what to say to people when they're writing the offer. So I would shorten that also. If I'm shortening my time periods, I'm going to shorten theirs, because what happens is this. As long as the seller's not late on these 7-day deliveries and I have 10 days to review, they give it to me on day 7, all the documents to review, and they give me everything. That gives me 3 days to review it, and my contingency is still up. The only time it would go past that 10-day contingency is if they delivered them on day 8 or later. But as long as they're on time on day 7, I have to live by that day 10, which really, really puts me under the gun. So I'm going to at least request when I write the offer that the seller at least give me the extra 2 days, right? I'm going to ask for 5 days after acceptance. And most listing agents, I know you guys do, and I'm sure most of the great listing agents out there already have the disclosures. That shouldn't be an issue for them to deliver that to me in 5 days, okay? So 10. Prelim. Same thing, that prelim should already be ready to go. It should be delivered at the same time. So if I'm reviewing seller's documents at 10 days, I should be able to do that. Now, the only thing that I might not change are these two. I'm not going to shorten those. And the reason I'm not going to shorten those is we don't have really any control on how fast these third parties deliver the documents, right? Sometimes homeowners associations, these common interest disclosures, sometimes homeowners associations take a really long time to do that. And 99% of the time, they're waiting on escrow to pay them to order those, because escrow's got to wait for the money to go in. So if I get my offer accepted today, I don't put my money in. Today's Thursday, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but I won't put my money into escrow, or required to put my money into escrow, until next Tuesday, right? Because it's 3 business days. So escrow doesn't get the money till Tuesday, which means that money doesn't clear until Wednesday, the wire, right? So on Wednesday, they get the wire, then they order the stuff. So we're already 5-6 days into escrow. That's a difficult thing to change, how quickly we can get these disclosures and the information on the leased or leaned items like solar panels and hero programs and PACE and all those things, right? That information sometimes takes a long time to get. The solar companies especially are sometimes a little difficult to deal with, and they take time to get that information to us to share with the buyer. So even as buyer's agent, I may not shorten these two, even if I'm shortening these two. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So now, if my buyer is selling their home to buy a property, then I'm going to check the box. Today, we're not going to go into that because that's a whole class by itself. So that maybe will be our next thing, is going over the contingent sales, making sure everybody's doing it, because they're still there, and I think it needs to stay fresh, and it's been a while, I think, since we've gone over it. But I'm not going to go jump over to the COP and dig into it, because then we'll be in this class until 2 more weeks of writing an offer. But if I am contingent, if it's contingent on my buyer selling a home to purchase this one, then I've got to check that box. Okay? If it is not, I do not check the box. All right. Questions about those time periods, paragraph 3L. Any questions throughout all of 3L there? No? All right, good. Oh, I saw a hand go up. Jenny, go for it.
Kyle, I'm still trying to process the explanation of FHA if it doesn't appraise, or that second form that you mentioned. Can you just explain it one more time so I can understand it?
Okay, you know what? Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's open this right now. I don't know. All right, let's open that. Okay, so here's the FVAC. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What it says is that if the property, it is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this contract, the purchaser shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property described herein, or to incur any penalty of forfeiture of earnest money, deposits, or otherwise, unless the purchaser has been given, in accordance with the HUD, FHA, or VA requirements, a written statement by the Federal Housing Commissioner, Department of Veteran Affairs, or a direct endorsement lender setting forth the appraised value of the property of not less than blank. So, if I have to write something in here, and if you guys don't do this form, escrow does it for you, and escrow automatically does it at the offer price. But if my contingency, if I've done here, we go back to where I did the appraisal contingency. If here I said it has to appraise for $750, then this form should say $750 right here. If it was the offer price, then it would be the offer price. If the property, whether I have an appraisal contingency or not, I could have already removed my appraisal contingency because we had to, whatever, and then it doesn't appraise for this amount, even without an appraisal contingency, I cannot lose my deposit as buyer. That's it. That's what this form says. So whatever amount you write in here on the FVAC, if it doesn't appraise for that, with or without an appraisal contingency, that buyer does not lose their deposit.
Okay, so to understand it, if at any event we have to go, or the buyer has to go above the listed price, the number here should be the listed price or the offer price to protect the buyer.
It depends on your buyer. If your buyer has the money, then it's your offer price. I mean, it's the listed price. If your buyer doesn't have the money to pay the difference, then it should be the offer price.
Okay. Okay, I think I understand now.
Okay.
Kyle, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's say the buyer sends the offer like at 600.
Mm-hmm.
So then you counter them at 620, and you had signed the FHA inventory clause at 600.
Mm-hmm.
Would I have to do another one at 620?
If you're the listing agent, leave it.
Leave it?
Yeah, because now as long as it appraises at 600, you don't necessarily want to raise it up if they went over. If you're the buyer's agent and you don't have the money to pay the difference, then yeah, you got to send a new amendatory clause to change the price.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? All right. Let's move on. Sorry if I'm making you guys dizzy. Let's get down to where we were here. All right. Time of possession. This is honestly one of my pet peeves that agents still don't do this. If I'm writing an offer, well, first off, they split up these two things. The old offer used to be like the possession and the occupancy were the same things. It's not true. It's not the same anymore. Possession is when I become owner, okay? And I become owner upon notice of recordation, right? That's the default, upon notice of recordation right there. As soon as we've got the, hey, you guys recorded, I am now the owner, okay? Occupancy is different, right? This is possession. I own it on this date, okay? So you're going to most of the time you're going to leave. I don't know any reason why you would change it, but this is it right here. Okay. That's it. That's possession. That's my ownership. Occupancy is different. Now, if a seller is living in the property, I don't understand why agents don't give the seller time. Okay? So if the seller's living in the property and they need to move out, let's first go with it is not contingent on them finding a replacement property. At a very minimum, you should give them 3 days after close of escrow. And as you guys can see, when I clicked on this, it added the seller's license to remain in possession for me to fill out. Because the seller's license to remain in possession, and I wish I hadn't done that because now I got to scroll down through this again. The seller's license to remain in possession is for 29 days or fewer, not 30 days or less. So if you go to 30, you got to move up to the RLAS. Okay. 3 days after close of escrow, I put the SIP in for 3 days after close of escrow. It's added. Let's say I'm not going to do that, but I am going to do, they need 45 days after close of escrow. It's going to add in here the residential lease after sale. I'm not going to click on it because I'm tired of scrolling. They're going to add the residential lease after sale. Once they add the residential lease after sale, what that's saying is that, hey, I have to, it's like a lease agreement. I got to agree to the terms, what I'm paying, how much it's going to cost me to stay in the property. Now, can they do it for free? Sure. Sure. But either way, I'm going to either have an RLAS or an SIP. Now, if I'm doing a contingent sale, I used to say 7 to 10 days. Now, my bare minimum is 10 days for you guys to give them to stay in the property after close of escrow. And you're going to do it for free. You're not going to charge them. We're talking about writing a strength of offer. And those 10 days after close of escrow, they don't cost you anything. You're not going to make a payment yet. Right? It drives me nuts when I talk to agents and they're like, well, they want to stay for 2 weeks. Well, okay. Well, my buyer's paying for it. Yeah, I'm not really. You're not making a payment for probably another 45 days. So, not really costing them anything other than the person, they're not moving into their house. But in this competitive market, do I want to have a strong offer? Do I also want to know that if it's a contingent sale, are they going to be able to move out right away? Absolutely not. So why do I put myself as buyer's agent in a position where I have buyers going, hey, we want to move in. Hey, we want to move in. Can we move in today? Can we get our keys? When are we getting our keys? We want to move in. Has the seller moved out yet? Has the seller moved out yet? Has the seller moved out yet? Why do I want to do that to myself? And if I do things the right way and have conversations with my buyers from the beginning, I don't have to deal with that as much. So if it's a contingent sale, at a bare minimum, you're going to give that seller 10 days after close of escrow at zero cost, and you're going to include the SIP. Always. Now, if you get one of those sellers that are like, look, we don't want to do a contingent sale because it's hard, it's, you know, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of paperwork, then you say, okay, well, what we could do is this. We'll close, And we'll rent back to you for 45 days to allow you to purchase a home while you have your cash, you're not contingent. And then I'm going to include the RLAS. And maybe in the 45-day one, I'll say, hey, listen, we're going to give you, X amount of days for free, and then we're going to charge you this amount for the following days. Whatever it is, you guys can negotiate that. But again, these are conversations with the listing agent, and I promise you, if you call the listing agent and say, hey, listen, just want to let you know, we're going to give you guys 10 days after close of escrow, right, to move out as part of our offer when when you're having that conversation. But I think that 10 days now on contingent sales should be our absolute bare minimum. Absolutely. Now, if you don't know this at the beginning when you write it, that they're going to need the 45 days or 60 days, which is the max for most buyers who are purchasing it for their principal resident, right? 60 days is the longest. You can't check this off. So it's going to get addressed in a counter. But just know that the form, if it gets more than 30, if it's 30 days or more, it's going to be the RLAS. If it's 29 days or less, it's going to be the SIP. So use the correct forms, right? The SIP doesn't allow for more time, so don't use it in those longer ones, okay? If it is tenant occupancy, okay, well, questions about occupancy? Any questions? No? All right. The occupied units by tenants, that form, the TOPA that they're talking here, like if I click this box and I have to include, like I know I'm buying a single family home with a tenant in it, or 2 to 4 units with a tenant in one of them, and there's tenants and I'm using this offer, I've got to include that TOPA even if the tenants are moving out. Even if the tenants are moving out. If it's going to be delivered vacant, great, I still have to include the TOPA. If the tenants are going to stay in possession with the property when I close, I still have to include the TOPA. This form is not dependent on one thing or the other. It's for both. And it addresses that. It addresses whether the tenants are going to be in possession when you close or if they're going to be vacated prior to close. Okay, so if it is tenant occupied, if it's 2, 3, 4 units, and I'm using the regular residential purchase agreement, even now the RIPA, I believe, has a reference to the TOPA now. If there are tenants in a residential property, I have to use the TOPA, even if they're going to vacate prior to close of escrow. I need you guys to know that, because it's one of the things that when we're finally going through and we're doing the QC on the files, we are missing TOPAs on tenant occupied properties. Okay. Any questions? Anybody? Okay. We talked about the seller delivery of documents. Go ahead, Jesus.
Since we're talking about the tenant occupied, if it is units, we also ask for the stop loss, correct?
That's addressed. That's addressed in the TOPA.
Under this, it's addressed in the TOPA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see what we got here in chat. In a situation of tenant occupied, if it's negotiated cash for keys, do you write that into the document, or you just mention or not? No. All you're going to address here, because the cash for keys is a whole separate thing. That's an agreement between the landlord and the tenant. There is a cash for keys agreement in Zip, but here all you're going to discuss in your offer is whether or not it will be tenant occupied or vacant. That's it. Okay, so we talked about the seller delivery of documents. Like, I don't need to change this unless the time periods are getting shorter. This 5 days to sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions, it's the same thing for both people. So I got 5 days from the time I receive all of the escrow instructions. I got 5 days to return them, and that goes all the way through the escrow, right? If there's any kind of amendment from escrow that gets delivered, you get 5 days. Okay, so that's what that's for. No need to change that. Time to pay fees for ordinary HOA documents, no reason to change that. Okay. They install the smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, water heater, bracing, all that stuff. Now, if my time periods are 10 days for my inspection, that means I'm probably going to order my inspection right away. and my appraisal's 10 days, which I'm probably going to order it right away. If I have shorter periods, I might shorten this also. Okay, because what it's saying is that it's saying the seller's going to install the smoke detectors, the carbon monoxide detectors, and make sure the water heater's braced prior to me doing an inspection or having the appraisal go out. Because what they're trying to do is cut out the fees on re-inspections. And the contract does state if there is any re-inspection, it's the seller's responsibility to pay that. And the reason for that is because as we get into smoke detector, water heater bracing, that's normally a seller's job, right? And what it says here is that it's going to be done 7 days after acceptance. So keep that in mind when you're talking to your sellers. Make sure those things maybe get done prior to marketing so that you don't have to worry about it, but know that you have to do that in 7 days. So I might only change this if my inspections and my appraisers were shorter times, just to make sure that it was done prior to the appraisal going out. There is a car form for cash for keys, yes. Evidence of representative authority, that's just for everybody. If there is a representative capacity, right, like I'm a signing representative or it's an entity, I have 3 days to show my proof. Okay. All right, questions on any of those? I really thought we were going to finish today, but it doesn't look like it because I'm too verbose. All right, let's do items included and excluded, and that's probably where we're going to have to end for the day. So items included. You know what's funny is I had an agent call me this week because they had gotten an offer, and I think it was the refrigerator that somebody had checked that was included. And they didn't specifically counter that the refrigerator wasn't included. They said, you know, the washer, the dryer, the dishwasher is included. Nothing else, right? And that's a little too vague, especially when someone specifically requests something. So, buyer's agents, when you look at the MLS and they have listed in there included, excluded, I don't care that it's in the MLS. I don't care that it was on a flyer. I don't care that they told you over the phone. I don't care they told you in person at the open house that these things were included. They have to be checked. So if the stove and refrigerator and the washer and dryer are included, I have to check the box. I have to check the box, okay? Because if it's not here, right, it doesn't get included. Had another agent this week that asked me, hey, in the TDS, they checked off stove, but they took it. My question to them was, did you put it in the purchase agreement? And they said no. And I told them that they had no issue with removing that stove. Even though it was in the TDS, it wasn't agreed as an item included in the contract unless it was a fixture, it was a built-in thing, okay? So please, again, to make sure your offer is stronger, check off all the stuff that is supposed to be included. Okay, if it says it's included in the MLS or flyer or anything else, or if it doesn't, but you're requesting it like a refrigerator or a washer and dryer, put it in. But if I were you, if it doesn't state it somewhere, I would, in the conversations I'm having with the listing agent prior to submitting my offer, hey, by the way, the refrigerator, the stove, washer, dryer, any of that stuff is being included in the sale. They might say, no, none of it is. Please don't put it in. Or they might say, hey, they might be open to it depending on your offer. If your offer is good enough, request it. Okay? But please, if you're assuming that something's coming, or if you know for sure it's been advertised that it's included in the sale, please check off the box. And this would be for anything that might be included in the sale that doesn't show up in this list. That's what these blank spaces are for. And excluded items are the same thing. Any fixtures, right, things that are built in, chandeliers, ceiling fans, right, things like that, that are not normally included with the sale, or that are normally included with the sale, if they're going to be excluded, they're not going to be part of the sale, I've got to check it. So if they tell me, by the way, the ceiling fan in the family room is very expensive and it's being excluded from the sale, and it says that in the MLS, then you put in, you know, ceiling fan, family room. Put it in your offer. put it in your offer, because again, it shows that you're paying attention. It strengthens your offer because they don't now have to add it to a counter. Now, they might already have a counter that's written that has it in there because they've gotten other offers, but they don't have to write in a counter, and they see that you're paying attention and not trying to get one over or take shortcuts. Okay? All right, so I think it's already 11:54. We'll just finish there. I guess it looks like we'll do one more week, and maybe we'll talk about some other stuff. Okay? Any questions? Let's stop sharing now. Anybody have any questions about anything? No? You guys got it all figured out? Jesus, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, I was gonna say, I once asked for the furniture because the owner was gone already, and I wanted to see if the listing agent would pay attention, and he didn't pay attention, so we actually kept the furniture. Yes.
Yeah.
We got to pay attention to this.
The other thing is you got to be careful too. I mean, that's good that you brought that. You got to be careful how much stuff you ask for. Like, as you see, the things that are checked off in that box, right? The stoves, the washer dryers, the refrigerators, the microwaves, the doorbells, security camera, like that stuff is a norm. Nobody bats an eye if all of that stuff is included. But when we start saying pool tables and couches and chairs and beds and all those things, you could lead yourself into an issue with appraisal, because now at some point the appraiser is going to go, hold on a second, there's value to that furniture. I mean, we're talking about thousands of dollars of furniture that's being included in the sales price. The bank is not going to finance your furniture. Right, so it could start affecting your appraised value, because you say, "Oh, I'm buying this place for $800,000, but I'm getting $10,000 worth of furniture." At some point, the appraisers are going to go, "Okay, well then the property's only going to appraise for $790, and now we have a problem." Right, so you got to be careful with stuff like that. In all cash deals, go for it; it's not a problem. But when you're financing, you got to be careful if you start throwing too much stuff as included in sale. What you would do in the norm, the right way to do that, if they were going to, it would be like, hey, furniture to be sold in separate bill of sale, and then you could do a bill of sale outside of escrow, even included as part, so that they know that it's not part of the sales price. Why is furniture applied to the appraisal of sales allow buyers to keep it? Because there has to be some value associated to it. You can't just give, like, if you address it as in the purchase agreement, like all the furniture is included, then what you're saying is it's included in this sales price, so I have to give it value. I'm not just handing it to you as a gift. It doesn't say, oh, a seller is gifting all the furniture to the buyer, right? It's included because of the sales price. So it's just how you word it, how you handle it. There's a right way to do it. A buyer will take on all furniture, or sale will include furniture done on a separate bill of sale outside of escrow. That's it. All right. Any other questions, guys? All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all being here. And I'll see you again in a week for this. If you missed any of it, or you didn't see last 2 weeks ago is on YouTube. This one will be on YouTube later today. So you can go back, review it, look through it, see if you missed anything. And I really appreciate you guys being here and listening to me ramble on about the contract. So have a great day. Be productive.